Okay, right. Hello, everyone. This video is going to be basically about how to write a seven-marker stats question, an increasingly more popular question that AQA are asking. Um, and this video is going to be based on just how to write the seven-marker stats question. I'm going to assume that you've seen the other video that's related to how to actually know what stats test to pick out. So I'm not going to be dealing with how to identify the right stats test. I'm going to be dealing with how to answer this seven-marker stats question. A seven-marker stats question, by the way, that's becoming increasingly more popular with AQA. A lot of my students for every mock exam and the actual exams will sometimes go down the route of hoping stats doesn't come up. Stats is coming up. Now, what's on the screen now is only actually about half of the questions. All the questions about critical values or type 1, type 2 errors and why you would use inferential statistics over descriptive, they're not included in this slide here. What is in this slide is all the time that AQA have asked you to identify a stats test and give reasons, or they've told you, e.g., they use the Spearmans, so they've told you they use the Spearmans, and then they've asked you to give the reasons. And as you can see on the left-hand side, it comes up every single year. Now, there was no exam in 2016, for those of you who are very keen to point that out. There was no exams in 2016. But have a look, 2017, 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25, there have been, generally speaking, multiple instances of AQA asking students to identify a stats test. And if you have a look at 2020, paper 2, it was the first time they asked you to do a seven marker, and they've now done that 4 times in 5 years. If you can answer a seven marker stats question, you can answer any of those questions that are on there. And what I want to do is I want to go through the structure of that, give you an example, and then show you a model answer response to it as well. So I'm going to focus in on one of the 2022 ones. In fact, the 2022 that come up in paper 2. I'll come to that in a second. So this is how you answer a seven-marker stats question. You get 1 mark for identifying the correct stats test, be it Spearman's or Pearson's or Mann-Whitney, chi-squared, whatever, right? You get 1 mark for saying it. That leaves you 6 marks left. And students always ask, like, if I get the wrong stats test, say it's a sine test, but it was actually chi-squared, and you say the wrong one, can you still get the remaining 6 marks? Yes, you can still get the remaining 6 marks. So you can actually get 6 marks out of the 7 that are available, even if you get the wrong question, the wrong stats test, sorry. So 1 mark for the identification of the stats test. You get another 3 marks for giving 3 correct reasons. What's the level of measurement? And so you just identifying, I don't know, ordinal, nominal, interval, whatever. You get marked for just simply identifying it. Whether it's experimental or a correlational design, and what is the design, and whether it's a test of difference and a test or a test of relationship. That gets you 4 out of the 7. To get the remaining 3 marks, which is where most of the marks are lost, is then the remaining 3 marks, which is contextualized evidence for each of the above. And I'm going to give you an example of that. Now, on the screen is a STEM, a scenario that I'm not going to read out to you. My advice would be to actually pause this now and see if you can figure out off the top of your head what the actual stats test is. I'll give you a minute to do that. I'm not going to give you a minute to do that, but I'll give you a few seconds to do that. And then we shall have a look. So, first things first. If we have a look, we're figuring out all of those level of measurement, so on and so forth. If you're reading through, first thing to point out here is that half of the children had working parents and the other half had stay-at-home parents. That clearly is independent groups. It's clearly independent. I'm not going to go into why it's a test of difference or whatever, but that clearly is independent groups. Why? You can't be in both of those. You can't be in both of those conditions. You're either a child who's got working parents or you're either a child who's got stay-at-home parents. So that is independent groups. So if you're thinking of that stats table, that immediately means it's going to be one of those three. It's not going to be sign test, Wilcoxon, related. It's not a Spearman's or a Pearson's because it's not a correlation. And we'll come to that in a second. So the next thing for us to do would be to figure out, okay, well, what's the level of measurement then? And if you go back, you can have a look. Level of measurement is in purple there, the number of agreed observations into a total social behaviour score for each child. When you're doing this, just think, when you think in the level of measurement, what's the DV, or what's the covariable if it's a correlation? How are they actually measuring those numbers? So, for example, they're doing the number of agreed observations. Well, that's not nominal. That's not nominal because it's not categorical. They're not turning it into categorical data. It's either ordinal or interval. And the truth is, it could actually be both. So how you justify it's really quite important. So, for example, I would personally say this is ordinal data. Why? The number of agreed observations in the total social behaviour score, ordinal data's got a true zero, a bit that you can't go below. You start off at zero social behaviours. If you're observing someone, they don't start on -7 social behaviours. Like that wouldn't make any sense. We start on zero. So for me, it's ordinal data plus. I won't go into the interval. I've got a better answer for that. So this means we actually have enough here to identify that it is a Mann Whitney U. It's an independent measures, independent groups design, and we know it's ordinal data. So that immediately means it's Mann Whitney U. Just to make sure, remember the other thing is whether it's a test of difference or test of relationship. We know it's a test of difference because it's independent measures, but that green one just there just tells us for sure there was a significant difference. They were trying to see if there was a significant difference between the social behaviour scores. And that's that test of difference. They're not looking for a relationship here. They're after they're doing an experiment. They're after a test of difference. So in terms of how that is actually written, what I've got here is a model answer and then a little 1 after every time you would have got a mark. So in this case, you get 1 mark for identifying that the correct stats test to use in this scenario was a Mann Whitney stats test. That gets you 1 mark. Now we need a bit of evidence and then contextualize it. So the first things first that we're going to go for, firstly, the study was a test of difference. Boom, 1 mark, right? You've identified that it's a test of difference. That actually gets you the mark. But then we need, and in the blue here is what we're giving, we need contextualized evidence. Now, just before, I'm just going to stop this just here. AQA, we think, are going to dig in a bit more to the strength of your context. I'm not going to go into why, a few years ago they used to do 4 markers and then people were guessing and still getting it right. But we think that the blue bit is going to have to be really, really strong or a lot stronger than most students write it. So firstly, the study was a test of difference, fine. And it was a test of difference between ... Need a bit of context here. The social behaviours of children raised at home and those raised by working parents. The context is going to be key here to whether you can actually get 7 marks. We got 3 marks out of 7 so far. Secondly, the data is of ordinal level of measurement. Fourth mark. There we go. All right, just identify it. This is seen by the fact that the social behaviour scores that were collected were not fixed in their intervals. The gap between 1 and 2 is not necessarily the same between 2 and 3 because they're observations, it's subjective data. So it's not like temperature that's factual. There's a bit of interpretation involved here. But if you want to make doubly sure, it also has a true zero. In this case, no social behaviours shown. We got 5 out of 7. To get 7 out of 7, you'd need the last one here. Lastly, the experimental design is independent groups. And again, that's that 6th mark there. As the children were either in the working parents group or the stay-at-home group, they could not be in either. 7 marks should take you around about 9 minutes and 15 seconds with that standard exam time. Extra time, it's something like 11 minutes, I think. It should not take you 9 to 11 minutes to write this. This is relatively straightforward stuff. And that's it. That's it, really. 7 marker stats question. Identify the correct stats test that's used. Give 3 correct reasons as to why that stats test is used. And then you are looking to give context to those. That is as concise as you're going to get it. As always, hope this is super useful. How to write a 7 marker. You're going to need to know this.